how many Pizza Expresses do you think now? I think it was 320, 400 around the country, something like that, all over the place. And Pizza Express member head, you know what it is? They said, roughly 20 quid. I said, what do you think our member head is? Roughly 20 quid. So wherever there's a Pizza Express, we can open an Everyman. That was my sort of rationale.
This is The Summit by Fearless Adventures. I'm Dominic McGregor, and every week my co-founder David Newns and I will be talking to inspirational leaders about their experiences as they strive towards their summit.
Hello and welcome to The Summit. Here we're interviewing inspiring individuals who've built businesses and disrupted industries. We're here to learn about their personal and their business journeys and everything in between. And today we're here with Daniel, who built Everyman Cinema, who disrupted the cinema industry globally. We're going to hear about his journey and the summit of his success. Hi Daniel, honestly so nice to meet you. I think we've all followed what you've done in terms of disrupting an industry in terms of cinema that has impacted the culture of the whole of the UK. Talk to us about where that journey started and what made you want to disrupt the way people view cinema?
Well, I didn't. I was telling Don before, it was definitely not thought out. But it sort of happened because I was living and working in an area of North London called Hampstead. The original Everyman Cinema came up for sale. I thought it'd be a good idea to buy it just because I knew the venue, and in fact there was a vacant space at the bottom, and I thought, maybe we'll do some sort of bar or something there because I knew the whole sort of social scene in Hampstead. And then bought the business and then learnt very quickly that it wasn't a great business, which I should have really done before, done more due diligence before. But then I was in it, and then from there, had to sort of come up with, okay, how do we make it an interesting business, for the customer? And then that sort of just opened me up to a whole line of thinking, which wasn't apparent thinking at that time in cinema. I think we just had this conversation before, didn't we, about big companies? So, big companies dominated the scene in cinema in 2000. They still do today in terms of, size of those operators, but not in the same way because then a few things sort of happened, technology being one of them, which sort of democratized the marketplace a little bit. So when I first got involved, the big companies ran the show, big companies being Odeon and those boys, which meant that as a new cinema company, you had to sort of come up with what are they, what can we do that they're not doing, and that was just basically business 101, right? So how can we make the customer the star of the show was sort of the thing. And that wasn't being done because it was all about the film.
So when you talk about running the show, they were the ones that were getting the top movies, exclusive content, and you were kind of left.
So, there's a whole load of stuff around that. And again, we were just talking before, and I was saying that from the outside in, cinema was always seen as a very racy business, but is not behind the scenes. And definitely wasn't in 2000 when I started. So in 2000 when I started, films were still being delivered on a Thursday night in a transit van, dropped off at a cinema. This happened at every single cinema around the country. Dropped off at a cinema Friday, a projectionist would come in, cut them up with some scissors.
When you say delivered, you mean the reels?
So the reel,
not a DVD, not even a DVD.
No. So reels of film in several cans, because a reel of film is too big to get in one can. So they're broken down. Mm-hmm. So they're cut up, put into 3 or 4 cans, metal things, and then delivered to a cinema. Guy in the projection box tapes them together, puts them on the projector, shows the film, right? And this was the process for the smallest to the biggest film. Whoever shoots the film owns the film. They sell the distribution rights by territory. So they sell the distribution rights to a UK distributor. UK distributor then converts the film onto cinema print, right? And I think at those times it was £1,000 a print, maybe £2,000 a print. So all of that meant that the biggest run of films you would get in the UK, which was about 3,000 screens, about 400 prints. So Star Wars would be the biggest, so the smallest would be 50 prints or something like that, but the biggest would be 400 prints. So you've got 400 prints divided over 3,000 screens.
Wow.
Right? what was happening was that the big cinema chains had been for years completely monopolising that process. So they would say, we'll take to the distributor, we'll guarantee so many prints, but you only give it to us in these areas. Yeah? So it's a complete monopoly. Because of that, the smaller cinema venues that's why they were all dying, because they couldn't get access to content. So what they were then doing was they were sort of going down this sort of rep process, you know, so indie films, rep, you know, that's what they were doing in these smaller venues, but the market for that wasn't big enough. So that's why they were dying off, and Everyman was in that position when I took it over. So we had to reinvent, you know, what could that experience be about, and that's why we just made it about the customer. And what you see in Everyman today is what we did then, because technology and consumer demands have moved on. Everyman today is now definitely the sort of the leading cinema concept in the country. Not the biggest, but the leader, although it's a sizable company. But the beauty of it, or the strength of it is, it's only ever been that. There are very few cinema companies which have only ever been one thing, because cinemas are traded, they change hands over the years. Number one, they stay around. So like you were saying, the York Odeon, right? You know, those venues can stay cinema venues for hundreds of years. You know, it doesn't happen in hospitality. I mean, hotels, yes. Restaurants, those type of spaces, they don't have those shelf lives. So because they've been around a long time, they change hands a lot. And then what happens is they get cobbled together into bigger circuits. So therefore, they're always a hodgepodge of venues and different standards from a customer perspective. It's never one experience. You know, they're always refurbishing one here and not one there and doing, you know, so it's inconsistent. Everyman today is so consistent, so pure. Whenever you go to an Everyman, it's exactly the same experience, you know, with sort of variations than another Everyman. And now there's nearly 40 of them.
The journey you've been on as an entrepreneurial journey, from taking that first site, realising it's not what you expected it to be, day one. When are those first kind of mini wins, you know, when you start feeling that you're getting attraction, momentum, that you think this is going to be something, or this could be something, or I'm really on something here?
You have to look back at that and think of those little things. They don't seem like big things at the time, but in hindsight they are. So everyone taught me about branding, positioning and language, right? Which I didn't know any of that. I was a property guy, just with an idea. But because I had to be customer focused, it then sort of took me down this road of trying to understand how you get that connection with customers and what that means in terms of branding, positioning, language. One of the early things we did with Everyman, once we started to sort of get forward with the idea, is we created our own language, right? So we got rid of words like foyer, all right? And we got rid of words like auditorium, you know, and we changed them to lounge, screening lounge. And we sort of became sort of consistent in that language. And I think one of the early indications of that, of success in that, was when, so the people you work with, you start saying these words and then they say them back to you, you know, and now you're talking about a common language. And then what happens is you overhear them saying to somebody else. So then it sort of takes its own path. And then you overhear being said to customers, and then customers saying to other customers. So you're sort of, you know, those are very significant moments that didn't feel like it at the time, but when I look back, that was the beginning of the director, you know, because for instance, right at the beginning, customers would come in and say, you know, where's the foyer? We haven't got a foyer. What do you mean we haven't got a foyer? You know, where do I buy my ticket? Well, you don't. You just sit over there and we'll give it to you. You know, I mean, head blown. But after a while, that just became, you know, second nature to everyone. So the language thing is a really important thing, which we were talking about the Filmworks company I'm working on now, you know, and so that language is very much part of our sort of culture now.
So obviously this whole idea of obsessing around the consumer, I think is really interesting, and how you disrupt, because people ignore consumers eventually because it all becomes, you know, systemized and too big. So I love this idea that you're doubling down on the consumer. So you started this, you built your first cinema, you know, obviously consumers were telling you that this was something they really loved. What happened next? How did you go from one cinema to an empire essentially? How did that look like? How did you get the right help and support? Did you need money? What are the issues?
How I did it technically was that I raised money from some investors. Yeah. But I always think to this day, like after I did that deal, I always think they sat down and sort of thought, why are we even doing this? Because I was just a force of nature in that process. I just became obsessed about, this is something. Everyman is something from a cinema which had been bankrupt twice and didn't work as a business. But once I got into this idea of what we could do for customers, right? So then I just became obsessed that this could be expanded and it could be a public company. I mean, that's what I was saying in those days when we turned over 289,000 in the first year in Everyman. I remember that number, and lost whatever we lost, right? And then Everyman this year will probably turn over 80 million. And I was telling people, no, we're going to expand this. It's going to be a public company and it's going to go all over the country. People were like, really? I mean, there were like 3 people in the cinema yesterday. No, yeah. And one of the things I was challenged with, which is an interesting conversation we just had about geography, was, but it'll work in London, but it won't work outside London, right early on. It's like, really, why is that? No, because outside London, because people won't spend the money. They haven't got the money, they won't spend the money. This very London-centric thing, right? And I was like, no, it's not true. And they said, why? Why do you think that? I said, well, because, do you know Pizza Express? That was my sort of thing, They said, yeah. I said, how many Pizza Expresses do you think now? I think it was 320, 400 around the country, something like that, all over the place. They said, yeah. I said, yeah, and Pizza Express spend per head, do you know what it is? They said, roughly 20 quid. I said, what do you think our spend per head is? Roughly 20 quid. So wherever there's a Pizza Express, we can open an Everyman. That was my sort of rationale. And that sort of was part of the pitch for, they sort of half believe that, but invested anyway. As it turns out, it does better outside London than it does in London.
Why is that?
Not so much competition with choice. Mm-hmm. London's a very difficult place to do anything because the minute you've done something, if you can see something today and it takes you 2 years to open it, right, you're already 2 years out of date. Because things are, and all of the best concepts in the world, are developed or come to London. That's a very tough place. And now even worse, staffing and cost of living, that type of thing. Outside of London, you don't get those pressures to the same degree. So you get much more traction in places.
So now looking back, obviously it's an amazing journey you've gone on. Were there any points where it was really bad?
Yeah, totally.
Talk to us about kind of what they were and how you got through them. And because a lot of entrepreneurs talk to us, and it's a tough journey. But when people replay their story, it doesn't come out a lot.
Well, because generally you're talking to people who've succeeded.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a bit like sport, isn't it? Just play tennis and then you'll be Roger Federer.
Yeah.
Most people you never hear of. They never get beyond the qualifiers. It's punishing. Being an entrepreneur is punishing. But it's something that you are, you sort of find yourself engaged with, and you're, it's part of what you do and what you are, and many times actually, I think I've made my life much more difficult than it should have been or could have been, because I just get focused on stuff like that, and then I'm in it, and then I've got to sort of work it out and sort it out. But the journey to success is basically, a few things that work and a whole load of things that don't. And I've definitely heard people say that before. So I'm sure that's the case. I guess managing the failures is the big thing, and they can break you.
Yeah. What was the one failure where you felt this should have succeeded?
You mean in Everyman or anything?
Just in general. I think the personal life and business are interlinked when you're an entrepreneur. So
yeah.
What was your failure where you thought that really should have been? I really believed in that.
Well, I mean, a recent example would be COVID, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Because I mean, as if life isn't difficult enough. Everyman is hospitality. We've got another business, hotel business and development in Southport. That was a real shock to the system. I mean, sort of everything being shut down overnight. So it's, I mean, we've come through it, but there are things you can't account for, aren't there? Yeah. And then they sort of hit you, and So I guess in that sense, that not seeing stuff coming, which you can't see coming, can knock you off course. I don't think I've got an example of something that I did that didn't work out in the sense you're saying.
Yeah.
But it's not black and white, because when I sort of think back, I'm thinking about your question and thinking about it's basically a whole load of little incremental bits. It's not like if you win the lottery in life, as in I don't play it, but if you play it and you win it, then you go from sort of 0 to 100 in just like that. So it's so you can always sort of, that's a very
binary thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Binary and very apparent. But if you work at something for 10 or 15 years, it's incremental. It never feels, you never get that moment. It just sort of,
because yesterday is exactly the same.
just plus a little bit, minus a little bit,
Compounds.
Yeah, and I think that is that's the true journey of success, isn't it? Really, for anyone, really, it's all little bits which sort of go forward a bit and back a bit, forward a bit more and back a bit. And when you sort of look back, you go, oh yeah, I see how that. I see how that works. Yeah.
And obviously on that kind of route up, is there a top for you? Is there a kind of, you mentioned potentially an IPO and kind of an initial kind of ambition, but is there a point where you've got to the top and thought, this is the summit, this is where I want to be, this is where the plan was, or is it a journey which just those steps keep going?
Well, I've got to say, this is very linked to aging. I hate to tell you. You got it coming. Because, age plays a big part in the way you think about stuff, which when I was younger, I just didn't think about at all. It's not a question of where the summit is, but it's a question of where my priorities are. So I've got 2 daughters who, are my priority. So I think a lot about their life now more than mine, more than when they were young. Because when they were young, they sort of did their thing. You take them to school and that's it, But now you think about their life, how I can assist that and what their journey might be. And, this is all thinking that is outside of my sort of singular thinking that I used to have. It's a bit of a burden, actually, because actually singular thinking turns out was much easier for me. When I have to think about more things, it's more complicated. So my summit now would be how to manage the next, my last 20, 25 years, whatever the number is, in relation to their lives. But I can never, there's nothing to sort of step off of for me. It's not like maybe you're alluding to, sort of, get to a number or get to a position and sort of step off. Sort of step off of what? When I saw the Paul McCartney interview and he was asked, when are you going to retire? He said, retire from what? No, because that's the point, isn't it? Retire from life. Sort of, if that's what you do, then that's what you do. In different degrees, maybe, slightly less energetic.
Yeah, you've been successful with Everyman, and it's an amazing story. A lot of entrepreneurs tell us when they've had success, when they try to do the second thing, there's a lot of pressure because you're expected to have success. What are you doing now, and do you feel that pressure, or what's next for you, and how does this pressure impact the way you think about that?
Not really. It's a new journey for me. That's sort of they're not really linked in my head. Maybe they're linked in other people, because you sort of read my story and you sort of, I guess that makes sense. But no, for me, it's like, so apart from the daughter thing, it turns out I'm a very singular guy. So now I'm on something else. That's what I'm on, So, and that being this Filmworks company, which we've launched, which is selling tools and services, online. But that's what I'm on now. So I don't sort of correlate the two.
In terms of your journey, what has been the kind of thing that's got you out of bed every single morning, and the most enjoyable part of it? Fear. Yeah. Fear of what?
Fear of never going back. So so this is sort of goes back to where you come from. Yeah. So sort of my ambition was always to remove myself and the circumstances I grew up in, which were not horrific, but just very base, shall we say. Mm-hmm. So that sort of ambition is in there, isn't it? To sort of better yourself. The ambition to make a better experience for my daughters, that's a big driver. And then also just, sort of, I'm better off to be doing stuff than not. As I saw Steve Coogan on Top Gear, I think Jeremy Clarkson asked this question about, exactly that, what gets you up? And he just basically said, Jeremy, the devil makes work for idle hands. And that's true, I'm better off involved with stuff than not being involved with stuff.
That fear and that kind of ambition piece, do you think that, I often think about my own son and, whether he'll have the same ambition I did. I grew up in Blackpool and wanted to make a better life for myself. And I worry as a parent that isn't built into his life now. Do you think about the same things?
Yeah, totally. I obsess way too much about all of that stuff. But again, that's my character. And the truth is, they won't. But knowing that, it doesn't make a difference because you will play your hand the same because you won't be able to resist, making things better for them. Even if you know that. Yeah, because you just can't do it. I wouldn't want them to grow up as I grew up because it's just too difficult. Too hard.
Yeah. So do you think, thinking the next generation of entrepreneurs, do you think it's possible to really disrupt like you did and create big business if you don't have that ambition or not? How much of a part of that did it play in your success?
Yeah, for me a lot. Yeah, but I'm heavy on ambition and low on intelligence. So, and sort of by that I mean, sort of academic intelligence, access to opportunity, so academically I came from a place where there was no access to opportunity and it wasn't expected, and in fact the opposite was expected. Yeah. So therefore that's all I had to bring to the table, right? So my daughters and your son probably are going to have a better balance. Yeah. They're going to have more on the other side, so then they don't need to be so heavy on my side, so it feels like my side is very energy intensive. When all you've got is sort of your, get up and go and your aggression and your determination, that's very draining.
Yeah, it's not as guided, is it? It's a lot more hope than control.
It's just dogged determination, and it takes it out of you. If I'd have been able to match that with better knowledge, which I'd sort of have now, but I didn't have in my 20s and 30s. Academically, my daughters are better than me without a doubt. But, that still lacks a lot in my experience. In my observation of schooling, they lack a lot outside of that. So maybe that was my benefit, because I couldn't go there, I just went somewhere else. So I learned other things because I wasn't being taken down that academic path. So I think you've got to input a lot into your son's life, that's my point, outside of the schooling. Yeah.
Do you worry about the future for your daughters? I think today we live in a world where, we're passionate about when we invest in entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs. Do you worry about the opportunities they have versus men? And kind of how do you think about that?
Versus men? Yeah, I'd say again, I worry too much about a lot of stuff these days. And just only in the last couple of years, really. Generally speaking, I think that the opportunities, so let's say wider for sort of mankind, are there to go to your question, gender issues? Probably, but I think I've worked very hard with my girls to not let them buy into those stereotypes themselves. But those stereotypes are very much around you. Pressure from social media, big issue to manage, I think, these days. Fantastic in every way, as David Bowie said in the 90s. Fantastic and horrible at the same time. Yeah. Everyone's always got in the sense of getting to the summit, everyone's got their issues, haven't they?
Exactly. There's always a journey to take.
Yeah, you just got to focus on where you're trying to get to.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on the summit today. Hope you found it insightful and what you listened to today helped you on your journey.